There is confusion about bodies. Last week, a legislator in Idaho made headlines when he asked whether a female gynecological exam could be done by having a woman swallow a camera. He does not understand the body, specifically the female body. There were many expressions of sympathy for his wife on social media. Poor guy. On Friday, I traveled to Santa Fe to address some other legislators, some New Mexico legislators. Thank goodness. I testified at a House committee hearing. This was a first for me. A House committee hearing is the first stop a bill makes before it's voted on by the full House of Representatives. On Friday, a committee was considering two bills that would limit abortion in New Mexico. Two bills that obviously relate very directly to certain bodies. Since it's related to the theme of the day, and since these are important issues, I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about those two bills. One would ban abortion after 20 weeks. As we all know, Albuquerque soundly defeated a similar bill in 2013. Voters understood that the reasons a woman might need to obtain an abortion after 20 weeks are many and often complex. Voters also understood that a woman must be able to make such a difficult, intensely personal decision according to her own health needs, faith, and values. They understood that she should make it in consultation with people who know her and whom she trusts, her partner, her doctor. And if we religious leaders are doing our jobs right, maybe she'll also feel she can trust her priest or minister. But it should not be decided by people who do not know her and do not walk in her shoes. But this time, the bill isn't going before voters, it's going before legislators, and it passed the committee by a vote of 7-6, and now it goes to the full House of Representatives. If you have an opinion on this or on the next couple of things I'm about to describe, I invite you to contact your legislator. It's really easy to do. You just call, leave whatever message you'd like for the legislator to receive. You don't have to be an expert on the issue. And even if you have a legislator who agrees with you, they will be really glad to hear from you. They've told us how much it means to them and how much courage it gives them when they get support from the community. The second bill is a parental notification law. It would force doctors to notify the parent of any girl under 18 before providing an abortion, no matter how early in the pregnancy, even if it's early enough for the pregnancy to be ended by simply taking a pill. For someone in a good, solid family, parental notification seems reasonable. But imagine the consequences for a teenage girl who fate has deposited into a religious conservative foster home, where the foster parent prevents her from taking that pill. Or imagine the girl who, for her own safety, can't allow her parents to find out she's pregnant. The tricky thing about legislation is that it makes general rules with very particular consequences. This bill also passed the committee and is now going to the House for a vote. But that's not all. Listen to this. Both bills also contain a religious exception rider, which says that no doctor, nurse, or other hospital staff person, and no pharmacist who objects to abortion on religious, moral, or personal conviction grounds is obligated to help a woman who needs an abortion. It does not say late-term abortion in this part. It applies to any abortion. And it does not say unless the mother's life is at stake or except in cases of rape or incest. This rider means that no matter how dire the circumstances, even if she has no other option, if the clinician or pharmacist she turns to for care does not believe in ending any pregnancy, they would be allowed to deny her, even if her health is at risk, even if she has no other option, and even though abortion is her legal right. This rider does not provide any safeguards for her. Only a very, very extremist position provides no safeguards for women, and this is in both of those bills that passed the committee. This kind of thing, religious exception, is often framed as religious liberty. What a funny twist of words from the religious right. I have to end this pregnancy. My life depends on it. Sorry, religious liberty. For true religious freedom to exist in our diverse society, one person's religious liberty has to stop at the tip of the next person's nose. It cannot be used to prevent a woman from acting in accordance with her religious values and her legal rights. Recently, abortion isn't the only thing that has prompted debate about the limits of individual control over bodies, though. Vaccination has also been a big issue in the news, along with the question of to what extent the state can make vaccines mandatory and what ethical obligation individuals have. Last week, a bill was introduced in our state that would restrict the religious exemption for vaccines. Currently, New Mexico and almost every other state allows a religious exemption for children who belong to a religion that is against vaccination for any reason. The parents just have to state that they would like the exemption. The new law would require that a clergy person sign an affidavit or writing a letter stating specifically that their faith, quote, requires reliance upon prayer or spiritual means alone for healing. So I care a lot about public health, but this bill also impinges on religious liberty by defining too specifically what kind of religious beliefs are allowable. Reliance upon prayer. Religious vegans, for example, could have an objection to certain vaccines, but they're not included in this exemption bill. If we're going to allow any kind of religious exemption, it has to apply equally. So from a religious liberty perspective, this bill is too narrow. Together, these bills raise really interesting questions about who has the right to control certain bodies and when, about what a body is and when it becomes separate from the body that brings it into the world, about what is fair, when one person's decision could impact others, as when someone decides not to get vaccinated, or when the state weighs the question of whether it is right to, in effect, sacrifice a few for the good of the whole, as parents of children with vaccine injuries have experienced. And they raise questions about when the good of the whole can legitimately override claims to individual religious liberty. Really interesting questions. Bodies are contested territory. They are individual and they're interdependent. They're private and they're public. They're physical and they're cultural. So I want to spend a little time today on the question of what a body is. The human senses, sight, touch, sound, tell us that bodies are distinct entities, right? Mine is separate from yours. They're contained in skin, which seems to form a boundary around the body between it and the outside world. To a certain extent, these perceptions are accurate, but the whole truth is much more complex and much more intriguing. To fully appreciate how fuzzy the physical boundaries around bodies are, you have to get down to the micro level. I'm going to get a little bit science-y here for a minute. On the micro level, there are a few different ways to assess what bodies are made of. One is by mass. About half of your body's mass is made up of water, for example. You've probably heard that before, right? It's why we're told to drink lots of water. And it's why we can live for a while without food, but we cannot survive for very long without water. We're made up of a lot of water. Within water, there are hydrogen and oxygen molecules, H2O, right? You already knew that too. So you're made up of oxygen and hydrogen and a lot of carbon and nitrogen and a dash of a few other things. These are the elements that the body is made of. These same elements and others are found in all of the things around us, in the earth and the plants and the other animals, which is to say that we are made up of the same kind of stuff as everything else. This is the truth of creation stories in which humans are formed from the earth or from clay. We're made up of the same kind of stuff as everything else. But another way to ask what a human body is made up of is to count cells. Cells are bigger than molecules. They're made up of molecules. This is where it gets really interesting, because it turns out that 90% of the cells in a human body aren't human at all. Does anybody know what they are? They're bacteria. Yes. Seriously, 90%. Now, bacterial cells are a lot smaller than human cells, so if you took out that 90% and you measured them, they wouldn't take up a lot of space. They would easily fit inside a 2-liter soda bottle. Are you grossed out yet? This is really interesting. What are you? What is a body? If you took out the 90% of your cells that are bacteria, you'd still look more or less like yourself, but you might not last long. Scientists have discovered that bacteria are really important to our bodily functioning. They help us digest our food and get nutrients from it, including from parts of food that we are unable to digest on our own. They are really important players in the immune system. Science suggests that bacteria play a key role in some health issues that have stumped us for a long time now, including body weight. We've all been taught that weight is determined by the difference between how many calories you eat and how many you spend, right? We've been taught that for years, but it only takes about 2 seconds of looking around to realize that that just cannot be the whole story, right? We all know people who eat a lot and they never gain a pound, and we all know people who diet constantly and they can't seem to keep the weight off. And in neither case does the person have real control over it. And in neither case is the calories in, calories out formula that useful. It's kind of true, but it's only part of the picture, clearly. Now we're learning what some other parts of the picture are: genetics, the interaction of genes and hormones and chemicals in the environment, and bacteria. Having the right kind of bacteria helps regulate body weight. We aren't fully functioning humans without the participation of non-humans. Interdependence. The bacteria that live in our body are a dynamic community, growing and shrinking, accepting or killing off new microorganisms that come onto the scene. And with all that happening, and with water and air entering and leaving our bodies all throughout the day, and with all that passes back and forth between ourselves and our fellow humans, what are we? Are we separate? Well, we still definitely experience our bodies as distinct. Objectively, from the outside perspective, there's a lot of interconnection and interdependence, and we're made up of the same building blocks as everything else. But subjectively, from the inside perspective, we are distinct. We experience our bodies as something that we have and something that has us. In the latest issue of UU World, our denominational magazine, the former president of the denomination, Bill Sinkford, has written an article called "Rise in Body or in Spirit." That line, of course, is what we often say when we introduce a hymn or ask people to stand for any reason in worship. Please rise in body or in spirit, we say. And it's our way of acknowledging that not everybody can stand on their 2 feet, but while standing is nice, it isn't the only way of rising for something beautiful. We can stand at attention with our spirits, too. So Bill has said this line for many years as a minister. But this year, for the first time, he found himself among those who rise in spirit. After years of living with an injury that left him with chronic pain and difficulty balancing, he'd finally gotten to the point where he had to place a hand on someone's shoulder in order to stand and sing along with the hymns and keep his balance. And one day he finally realized that the invitation to rise in spirit instead of in body was for him. It was a tough realization to accept. He remembers how, as a young man, he knew he was eventually going to get older, but becoming an elder was never his goal. It seemed more like an inevitable destination than a goal, he says. I remember looking at those older men, he writes, noticing their beginning or advancing fragility, the tentativeness in their step, their thinning legs, their etched faces, the age spots. But for Bill, and for all of us, I'd wager, it's one thing to know something intellectually, and it's another thing to experience it firsthand. So he was furious with his body for letting him down. Of course, This fury is only possible because however scientifically amazing and permeable our bodies are, no matter how much water they're made of or how much we resemble a microbial planet more than the distinct animal we think we are, we only have one body. And we are stuck with it. For the same reason, no matter your age, I'll bet you can relate to the experience of being angry or frustrated with your body. I know I can. My first memory of this is from when I was about 8 years old, and I overheard the pediatrician predicting to my mother that I would be about 4 feet 10 inches tall when I grew up. I was devastated. I was born to be big, baby. I could feel it. All my feelings and my dreams were so much bigger than me. I was bursting at the seams. How could I stay small? Through sheer determination, I made it to 4'11". Our bodies don't always do what we want. They don't always match how we feel on the inside. And they age. We are all on the spectrum of ability and disability. We're all heading more toward the disability side. That is the natural progression of life. But man, it can catch us off guard and be frustrating the first time and the second time, and maybe even more times after that when we struggle to come to terms with it. Our bodies get sick, they malfunction, and they are vulnerable to injury or impairment from outside forces. Not only that, but bodies inhabit cultural spaces. James talked about this a little bit last week in his wonderful sermon on Black humanism. Black humanism is religious atheism through an African American lens. If you missed his sermon, you can catch it online on the church website. It's gotten rave reviews all week. James pointed out, as Black humanists have, that it is an embodied theology. It emerged from the worldview and thinking of a people whose bodies marked them in ways that called attention to their bodies, Black bodies that were socially marked by others for slavery and later for oppression. Bodies always inhabit cultural spaces, female bodies too, of any color, elicit different reactions than male bodies, and because of them, women are taught to behave differently than men. Sometimes people are born into a body that feels like the wrong gender, and the cultural space we inhabit makes it very hard to switch. Why? Why shouldn't we be able to switch? It's just cultural. All bodies are socially interpreted, whether it's for skin tone, size, gender, ability, age, or something else. For some people, the interpretation is favorable. For others, it can be devastating. Across time and cultures, there have been different ideals of beauty. In some places and times, fat has been revered. More recently, in our time and place, it has been shamed. And then at the close of 2014, the media was calling it the year of the rear. Have you guys been watching this? The year of the rear. Big behinds are in, hallelujah. But hang on a second. Can't we just love ourselves, whoever we are and whenever we are? What is it with all the body shame? And what role does spirituality or faith have in helping us make peace with and even love our bodies? In the Hebrew scriptures, we have one of those creation stories in which the divine forms human beings out of the earth and breathes into them to bring them to life. Elements kissed into being by God. In the Christian imagination, it's become popular to think that after death, bodies and souls are separated and souls go on to heaven. The idea that the body dies but the soul lives makes bodies sound like garbage that gets thrown out. But the Bible doesn't say any of that. The ancient stories gathered in the Bible convey together that material creation is good and that bodies will be resurrected. The Hebrew scriptures are affirming of bodies, human and earthly, The Hebrew scriptures are filled with praises for birds, mountains, trees, rocks, air, and everything made by the Creator. Here I'm reminded of our reading this morning in Blackwater Woods by Mary Oliver, who is in fact a psalmist for our age, with all her praise for the physical world and her sense of oneness with it. In the Christian Bible, too, in the New Testament, bodies are affirmed. They're baptized and healed. When Jesus' friend Lazarus dies, Jesus doesn't mutter some not very helpful cliche about him being in a better place now. He cries and resurrects him, meaning his body. Jesus washes his disciples' feet, and Mary anoints Jesus' feet with perfume. At the Last Supper, it is the body he speaks of as he asks his disciples to remember him. "Eat this," he says, holding up the bread. "This is my body." Without our bodies, without the bodies of trees and the animals, the bodies of water, and the heavenly bodies, how would the Spirit move? That was the wisdom of that age. "This is my body," he says. But when we get to the letters of the Apostle Paul, there we see a new influence, the influence of Greek philosophy, which taught that the mind belongs to a different, higher realm, higher than the body. Greek Pythagorean thought taught that when the soul achieved purity, it would be liberated from the body and from cycles of rebirth. And here it starts to sound similar to certain teachings from Hindu and Buddhist religions. As Christianity grew to include more Gentiles, which at first meant mostly Greeks, it adopted that dualistic perspective, the idea that the mind and the body are separate. But can we really separate the body from the mind? 2 weeks from now, we'll contemplate that question, and 2 weeks after, I'll take on the concept of the soul. Those are parts 2 and 3 of this Body, Mind, and Soul sermon series. For now, let's come back from Mesopotamia for a moment, back from ancient Greece, and back from the table and the story of the Last Supper, back to your body. The one that awoke this morning, received a little breakfast, and went outside to greet the day and travel to this sanctuary. Your body, which is no less mysterious than the mountains and is possibly as unfathomable as the sea, but which is yours for whatever time you have. Maybe it's going strong, or maybe you have to coax it along. Maybe you can stand fine on your own, or maybe the time has come now when you need a shoulder in order to stand and sing. Your body carries your stories in its genetic code, in its habits and its scars, in its laugh and frown lines, in the way you adorn it or not. It is like all other bodies, and yet there has never been and there never will be one identical to it. Breathe. Your body is a miracle of synergy and energy and of the oneness of all things. It is precious. It is beautiful in its fine detail and in its broad strokes. Blessed be your body, and blessings to you.